It is. So John chapter 11, Jesus has left Jerusalem and he's in Bethany.
No.
He's not in Bethany. He's away from Bethany.
It actually starts at the end of chapter 10.
Yeah.
In chapter 10, verse 40, to the end of that chapter, it's talking about Jesus' response to that 2 months that he spent in Jerusalem between the Feast of Tabernacles and then the Feast of the Dedication.
Oh, because I've missed a bunch.
You've missed just 3 verses at the end of chapter 10.
Where am I going? Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Okay, so here's chapter 11 here. Right, so end of chapter 10. Jesus withdrew again across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing earlier. There he stayed while crowds came to him. They said, "John gave us no miraculous sign, but all that he said about this man was true." Many came to believe in him there. So there was that sort of question amongst the people. Some said, "He must be telling the truth." Others said, "No, he couldn't be." Others said, "How could he do the miracles that he does?" So there's lots of division amongst the people.
No, this is among the Jews.
Amongst the Jews, yep.
The people were, I think, largely moving in the direction of believing, because that's what it says here. While crowds came to him. And it seems like John differentiates between the crowds or the people and the Jews. The Jews are mostly Pharisees, I think, or Pharisees in connection with Sadducees, the rulers, the official rulers, but they were the, I don't know, what you'd call them, the officials. Yeah, the officials. And they were in 2 minds. Amongst them, there was the argument going on whether Jesus was just demon possessed, and that's why he had these supernatural powers, or whether he really was the Messiah.
So you realise from this passage that Jesus' disciples must have been pretty scared, pretty just on edge after what had happened in Jerusalem. So we know there's at least 2 times there where people took up stones to kill him, and his disciples must have been there with him, and somehow he managed to escape. I don't know whether he escaped because, he was able to find some opening in the crowd, or whether people didn't follow through what they said they were going to do. But it sounds like it had really scared them, because when he says that they're going to go back to Bethany and go back to see Lazarus, that's when Thomas says, let's go and let's die with him. And, that before that, they've said, that they're going to kill us if we head back there. They're going to kill you.
Maybe you should read that passage.
Yeah, that was just a reflection on and reading that passage a little bit, and then thinking back over what we just read, that must have scared the disciples.
Oh, absolutely.
They were on edge.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't you be? You were outnumbered. There was only 12 of them and Jesus, and then there was the whole leadership of Israel and the whole population, and then throw in the Romans on the side as the occupying force, visible all over the place with their armor on and their weapons. So Jesus was obviously stepping over onto the wrong side as far as the situation was concerned in Palestine back then in the 1st century.
Yeah.
The only thing is that they were convinced that he was on the right side and they were all on the wrong side.
Yeah. So chapter 11, verse 1, there was a man named Lazarus who had fallen ill. His home was at Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus had fallen ill, was the woman who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. Now, that story doesn't occur in John, does it?
In John?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's in the start of chapter 12.
Yes. Oh, okay, but that hasn't happened yet.
No, it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
What I really find remarkable there, though, Lucas, is he puts in this little parenthesis, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And then this Mary, whose brother Lazarus had fallen ill, was the woman who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. In chapter 12, he gives a story just before the triumphant entrance into Jerusalem. You know, when he came in riding on an ass, a donkey. But it's mentioned by Matthew and Mark and Luke is the fullest of them all.
Don't they have the story fairly early on though? In the Gospels?
No, it's in Mark chapter 14, which is.
Oh, okay, right. So that's right near the end. Yeah. Oh, you're right.
Although in Luke, it's a little bit more vague, I think, tucked in away amongst the journeying of Jesus. But what I wanted to point out was that the whole story that's told certainly in Mark, I'm not sure about Matthew and Luke, but Mark makes a big point about the fact that they all turned upon Mary and said, "What are you wasting this valuable ointment for?" And Jesus' answer was, "Leave her alone. She's done this for my death." And then he says, "Wherever this gospel is preached, this
story will be told."
Story will be told.
Yeah.
I think that's so lovely, you know. That and this is the evidence of it. When John is writing his story,
he has to mention it.
He mentions it because it's part of the common knowledge, and he's drawing on that common knowledge.
Yeah.
And then when he includes it in the story of the last week, when Jesus comes back to Jerusalem, he doesn't mention at all this promise that she would be talked about around the world, but he's the evidence of it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. All right, so going on, the sister sent a message to him, "Sir, you should know that your friend lies ill." When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death. It has come for the glory of God, to bring glory to the Son of God." And therefore, though he loved Martha and his sister and Lazarus, after hearing of his illness, Jesus waited for 2 days in the place where he was. After this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "Rabbi," his disciples said, "it is not long since the Jews there were wanting to stone you. Are you going there again?" Jesus replied, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone can walk in the daytime without stumbling because he sees the light of this world. But if he walks after nightfall, he stumbles because the light fails him." After saying this, he added, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I shall go and wake him." The disciples said, "Master, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." Jesus, however, had been speaking of his death, but they thought that he meant natural sleep. Then Jesus spoke out plainly, "Lazarus is dead. I am glad not to have been there. It will be for your good and for the good of your faith. But let us go to him." Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." So, again, there's a story of sickness and Jesus referring to what will come of it as something that will bring him glory. Sort of shades a little bit of at the start of the story of the man born blind.
Exactly.
You know, why was this man born blind? No, it wasn't the sin of his father or his mother. It was so that to show the glory of God, the Father, at work amongst you.
In this case, he adds the little bit extra. It says, "This sickness will not end in death. It's come for the glory of God, to bring glory to the Son of God." There's that little bit of adding on to what he said in chapter 9 with the case of the blind man.
And from what we know later on, the raising of Lazarus was a major, a really huge thing in the whole community in Jerusalem, and that the leaders realized that they needed to get rid of Lazarus as well as Jesus because of the stir that had caused amongst the people and the faith that it was stirring up amongst them.
It's worth noticing, I think, that and probably relates back to what it means when it says to bring glory to the Son of God. It's weird, but in John, and in Paul too, the idea of Jesus being glorified is referring to his death and his resurrection.
Yeah.
And it probably is true that Jesus going back into Jerusalem, where they were trying to kill him anyway, but he went back in the middle of the Passover, so that sort of handicapped them a little bit, held them up until he was betrayed by Judas. But what Jesus did in raising Lazarus from the dead was the final straw. That was what provoked the response from the Jews to go ahead and arrest him, put him in prison, and then judge him and crucify him quickly.
Yeah.
So when Jesus said this is for the glory of God, that's referring back to the sort of thing that happened with the blind man, that showed a miracle. And obviously it did. And for the crowds, it had a huge impact. But for the Jews, the only thing that it did for them was to make them more determined to kill him and to kill Lazarus to get rid of the evidence.
Yeah.
It's sort of incredible that such a great thing happened, and the consequence of it was that those who were against Jesus tried to damp it down and get rid of it and not to take notice of it. And it only confirmed them in their previous judgment.
Yeah.
Not based upon a real hunger for truth and a search for reality and meaning, but only to protect their own selfish interests, so that they don't lose their income and their place.
It seems that once again, the presuppositions you start with will take you to the same place, like back to where you started.
Yep.
So if you have a heart that says, nothing is possible, then you'll end up at the point where no matter what Jesus does, you'll come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to have a heart that's open to the possibilities and open to the possibility of what God might be doing amongst you right now.
Not only a heart, but a mind as well. In that, the end of chapter 10, the bit that we read, where is it? Lost it. Oh, yeah. It says that when he stayed on the other side of the Jordan, which of course was in the territory of Perea, it was called, and it was joined with Galilee, not geographically, but it was under the rule of Herod in Galilee. Herod the Great's son, Herod Agrippa. And so Jesus was outside the jurisdiction of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
And he was safe there. And it's amazing that crowds thronged to him. They went all the way. It's 33 miles from Jerusalem to the other side of the Jordan River. 33 miles? No. 33 kilometers.
Yep. So that would be, 2 days walking?
Well, hard walking, it'd be 1 day.
Yeah.
Because Bethany was, I think it was 3 or 4 kilometers from Jerusalem on the Jordan side of the city. So it would have been about 28, 29 kilometers, I suppose.
Yep.
To walk. Well, you hike. How far do you hike in a day?
Probably the furthest would be 30 Ks.
Yeah.
To do it comfortably.
Yeah. Well, then that's a day's walk.
Yeah.
From Bethany over the Jordan to. But what I wanted to point out anyway was that it's what the crowd said in chapter 10, verse 41, they said, John gave us no miraculous sign, but all that he said about this man was true. Many came to believe in him there, So what the miracles didn't play as big a part as the fact that John had accurately predicted what Jesus was going to do. And if you add to that the fact that John was the last of the prophets of the Old Testament, and you can add all the prophecies of the Old Testament to the same thought that it's what was prophesied about Jesus that most impressed the people, not the miracles.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it's not just it's not just the amazement and the recognition of something great going on, but it's the steady thinking through and seeing how this fits into the big picture of what God really intends and what God is doing in the world.
Yeah. So then here Jesus is, and he deliberately waits for 2 days in the place where he was before responding. I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, especially when it says later on, where we're up to, I'm on the wrong page.
I just wonder whether he's trying to create a scene.
Well, that's the implication down in verse 15. It says, then Jesus spoke out plainly, Lazarus is dead. I'm glad not to have been there. It will be for your good and for the good of your faith. But let's go to him. And it almost seems like he deliberately waited until Lazarus had died before he went there so that he could raise him from the dead. That doesn't fit. It doesn't.
I just don't see Jesus doing that on other occasions. Like there's so many times where the leaders will come to him and say, perform a sign, show us who you are, reveal who you are. And Jesus says, no, I'm not going to do that. But here, I guess it's on his terms, in his timing, he's going to perform this sign, which is going to achieve his purposes.
That's partly true, Lucas, but it's not the whole story at all. It says that he waited there for 2 days, and then he went back. And for the message to come from Martha and Mary down to where Jesus was, there's
that's 1 day. Yep.
Then he waits 2 days, that's 3, and then it takes another day to get back there.
It's 4 days.
It's 4 days.
Oh, so he wouldn't have made it anyway.
Not only that, but when he got there,
he's been in there for 3 days.
4
days, right.
4 days. So what it means is that Lazarus died almost straight away after the messenger had left from Mary and Martha,
right,
go to Jesus.
Yep.
And Jesus already knew that Lazarus was dead.
Yeah.
And so there was no hurry to get back there.
Yeah, okay.
And I think he probably chose to go at the time when it was going to be most obvious that this was a miracle, He'd been 4 days, and this is what Martha said later on when Jesus said, take the stone away.
Yeah, the smell.
In verse 39, Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, Sir, by now there'll be a stench. He's been there 4 days.
Yeah, okay. So he wants to clearly do a miracle and people know that he was really dead.
Exactly that. And also that it's not only to be clear about it, but it gives time for the burial, time for the Jews to come. There's a whole week of mourning that goes on still in Jewish families after a death. And it's customary for people to come and to give their condolences and so on, comfort. So Jesus, I get the picture of him knowing that knowing that Lazarus has already died anyway when he hears the message, and he sends the message back to Mary and Martha, which is a little bit, the sisters just send a message to him: "Sir, you should know that your friend lies ill, or the one that you love." And it's really worthwhile thinking about that too, that the sisters call Lazarus Jesus' friend.
Yeah.
And there must have been a heap of things go on for a friendship to develop between Jesus and Lazarus. There's a lot in this story that's not told.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of details that are told. There's a really, this story is, it sort of has a ring of truth about it because it's so real, so much going on. So, yeah. And so much that I pictured John having this picture in his mind, remembering vividly the whole circumstances of this 4 or 5 days. But the message that Jesus sent back is a little bit ambiguous. When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death." But he already knew that Lazarus was dead. So, like on his end of the message with his disciples, he was the one who, it must have been supernaturally, and I sort of goes with at the beginning. Remember when Jesus told Nathanael that he'd seen him under the fig tree, and those mysterious times of it seems like he had a power to know things from a distance. Anyway, he certainly knew that the mathematics makes it clear that he already knew that Lazarus was dead. So the message that went back to the sisters was, this sickness will not end in death. It's come for the glory of God, to bring glory to the Son of God. And when you think of it from that perspective, what that is saying to the sisters is, remember who already knew that their brother was dead. When the messenger got back, he would have said, this is what Jesus said. This will not end. What is it? This sickness will not end in death. As far as the women were concerned, it already had ended in death.
Yeah.
So there's a strong kind of hint to them that they should really consider that there's something more in what is going to happen to their brother than what they had ever thought of. It was stirring them up to remember the things that Jesus had said already.
But it doesn't seem like they did grab hold of that, because they were very, very upset and obviously pretty disappointed that he hadn't been
there. Isn't that just the way it is with us? We'd sooner we'd sooner continue with what we really know about for sure, rather than to trust the uncertain future that, even with God's promise, could look as though it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been 4 days in the tomb. Bethany was just under 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come from the city to Martha and Mary to condole with them on their brother's death. As soon as she heard that Jesus was on his way, Martha went to meet him while Mary stayed at home. What's going on there? I
think the message came, remember, this is before mobile phones. I mean, phones and internet and all the rest of it. Mary's, from the story in Luke's gospel, Martha is the one who's up and about. She's active, she's eager, bustling around.
Bit more of a doer?
A doer, absolute doer. So she would have heard the message that came from whoever first heard that Jesus had arrived somewhere in the village. And So without saying anything to Mary, she takes off to meet him, and Mary is left behind. But just one thought about Thomas. In verse 16.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Didn't give a chance to comment on that one.
You did mention it. The disciples earlier, when Jesus had sent the message back to Martha and Mary, it says, verse 7, after this he said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. Not to the family, not to Bethany, but to Judea, emphasizing the fact that Judea is sort of the other country. They were in Perea, across the Jordan, where it was safe. So he's really reminding them that they're going back to Judea, and that's when the disciples say, look, they were just trying to stone you to death there, and probably would have meant that they would have been in trouble too for being his followers. So they're not just concerned for Jesus, but for themselves. And so they're very much in, then they're not in the dark at all about what to expect if they go back to Judea.
Yeah.
It's plain as anything.
And actually, that does remind me. Oh, were you going to say more about that?
Just that when Jesus said to them, after saying this, he added, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I shall go and wake him. That's important, I think. I shall go and wake him.
Yeah.
Previously, he had said, let us go back to Judea. But then then later he said, I shall go and wake him.
Yeah.
It's almost as though he knew that the disciples were scared, really reluctant to go across the Jordan into Judea. And so he doesn't say they have to come with him at all. It's their choice whether to go or not.
Yeah, okay.
That's the point. And that adds more point. I mean, first of all, they try to talk him out of going across, because when he said he's asleep, they thought he meant that Lazarus was recovering, sleeping peacefully, not dead. And so Jesus had to later say, he's dead. And
they would have thought there's no point going back if he's dead.
That's right. And he was, but first of all, if there's hope that he's awake now, he's asleep now, and he's not going to be really so serious, let's not bother going back.
Yeah.
And all of that makes it even more kind of pointed when Thomas says, let's also go that we may die with him.
Yeah.
It seems to me like Thomas didn't really believe what Jesus said about resurrection, or hinting about resurrection, or even the big claims that Jesus had made about who he was. Thomas seems to be the kind of bloke who really wants the facts. He wants to know for sure, and he's not going to go out on a limb for anybody's sake. And so when he says, let's go back and die with him, it's just amazing. It almost makes me cry to think of his loyalty.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't believe.
Yeah.
Somehow or other he had a love for Jesus and an esteem that meant that he would rather go and die with him than leave him by himself,
Yeah.
There's some sort of it made me start to wonder just how convinced in our minds do we have to be if we can only love Jesus that deeply and show that much loyalty that we would obey him. Later on, Jesus says, he it is who obeys me is the one who loves me. And Thomas exemplifies this beyond anything that I can think of. So I want to be, in the times when I have any kinds of doubt at all about whether God is in Christ, I want to be like Thomas.
Because he just does it anyway.
Yeah,
I'll just go and die with him.
yeah. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Anyway.
One other bit, I'm jumping around a bit here, but I realised I skipped a bit, was in response to, let us go back to Judea, the disciples say, well, they were trying to stone you before. This is verse 9 now. You're going to go back there. Jesus says, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone can walk in daytime without stumbling because he sees the light of this world. But if he walks after nightfall, he stumbles because the light fails him. What's he talking about there?
It's exactly the same as with the blind man. He said the same things there. And then in chapter 12, he repeats it again. And It seems to be like all that Jesus is trying to say is, look, there is an allotted time when, just by in the nature of things, and what you're going to do, you have to do in that time, because that allotted time runs out. And in ordinary life, we get a day. Whatever we do, we have to do in daylight. Naturally, we haven't got an ability to extend the daylight like out of ourselves. Now we've made everything so that it doesn't make a difference between day and night. But
yeah,
very definitely in that time, there's an allotted time. And it was true in the big scale of things for Jesus. He had come into the world as a man with a man's span of life,
yep,
which at the most is 70 years. His was only 30, and his active ministry was only down to 3 years.
yep.
And he had to get across to the human race the message of God's love, and to bring about the fundamental change spiritually that would forgive sin and release a power to transform us, to make us new people.
Yeah.
So for him, it was very, very real that he had a job to do, and there's an allotted amount of time in which to do it. And so let's get on and do it.
So he's just saying, he's talking about his time right now. This is the time now for me to go to Jerusalem. This is the time for me to achieve what I need to achieve, because the daylight hours is coming to an end. I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do. Then it'll be dark and stumble. We've got to get it done now.
So in a way, it's a parable. All of that is true for each one of us. When I'm working outside in the garden, come 6 o'clock, it's too dark, have to put the tools away and go inside. And that's a parable for Jesus coming into the world to do a specific job in a specific time. And it comes back to us as well. As his disciples, following Jesus here and now, we are given a specific job to represent him before the power of the kingdom breaks in and changes this world system, so that there are no more Afghanistans at all in the world, where the world is going to be as God intends for it to be, intended always for it to be. And as followers of Jesus, we get this one chance to represent him and his message. And that scares the daylights out of me, because I think of how much time I spend just looking after my own comfort, and how much, if I only knew what to do so that I could make an impression in everybody's lives, I'd do it.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to finish then.
Good place to start for me.
Yeah, that's true. This is all just by way of introduction.
So it is. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.